Billionaire asks a black waitress for financial advice as a joke. But her first words stunned him. The clinking of glasses and soft jazz filled the marble-walled restaurant in Midtown Manhattan. It was the kind of place where power had a reserved table, and tonight, that table belonged to Edward Langford, a billionaire whose charm was as polished as his cufflinks. He leaned back in his chair, surrounded by investors hanging on his every word. Every laugh at his jokes was a small performance of loyalty. Across the room, Ariana Hale moved quietly between tables, her steps measured, her uniform crisp. To most guests, she was invisible, a shadow that appeared only when a glass was empty. But there was something in her composure, a calm that did not belong to a woman serving water to men who owned skyscrapers. When Edward caught her passing, he smirked. "Maybe she can tell me where to put my millions," he said, loud enough for the table to hear. Laughter followed. Ariana turned, met his eyes, and spoke in a voice that was steady but sharp. She laid out a brief analysis of the tech sector's overvaluation, mentioned bond yields, and predicted a correction that had not yet hit the news. The laughter died. Folks paused mid-air. Edward's smile faltered. Who was this woman, and how did she know that? The night ended the same way it always did. Ariana walking home under the glow of city lights that never seemed to warm her. The noise of Manhattan faded as she reached her narrow apartment, a single room above a laundromat that hummed through the night. The air smelled faintly of detergent and exhaustion. She kicked off her shoes, loosened her apron, and sat by the small window overlooking the street. Stacks of unpaid bills waited on her table like silent witnesses to her downfall. Every dollar she earned went toward debts she never created, legal fees she could no longer fight, and a life that felt borrowed. Yet she carried herself each day with quiet dignity, never asking for pity, never explaining why someone so articulate was serving coffee and clearing plates. Before the scandal, Ariana Hale's world had looked very different. She had been a senior quantitative analyst at one of Wall Street's most prestigious firms. Her name carried weight in rooms lined with glass and ambition. She had built models that predicted market movements with uncanny precision, earning the attention of executives twice her age. Her supervisor, a man she once admired, often said she had a mind made of numbers and instinct. But admiration in those circles came with conditions, especially for a black woman who outperformed her peers. The trouble began with a single file, a confidential trading document linked to an acquisition no one outside the boardroom was supposed to know about. Ariana had flagged the irregularities, unaware her supervisor was using her access to conduct illegal trades. When the investigation came, he was ready. Emails were altered, timestamps manipulated, and Ariana's credentials conveniently placed at the center of the scandal. She had believed him when he said, "Take the fall for now. I'll fix this." He never did. Instead, he testified against her. The headlines were merciless. Rising star in insider trading scandal. Her photo was plastered across financial news channels, her reputation dismantled in real time. In a matter of weeks, she went from being sought after by hedge funds to being blacklisted from every firm in New York. Friends distanced themselves. Calls went unanswered. Her name became a warning label whispered in corporate hallways. With no one willing to hire her and her savings drained by legal costs, she took the only work she could find, serving tables at one of Edward Langford's upscale restaurants. The irony was bitter. She had once advised on mergers that funded places like this. Now she poured wine for men who discussed them. Still, she refused to let bitterness consume her. Each morning she pressed her uniform, tied her hair neatly, and faced another day with quiet grace. Her colleagues knew her as polite and efficient, unaware of the brilliance she carried behind her calm eyes. Sometimes when she cleaned tables after closing, she would glance at the stock ticker running silently on the restaurant's television screen. Her mind still worked in patterns. She could see trends and anomalies before the analysts on air mentioned them. There were moments when the ache of injustice tried to drown her, but Ariana had learned something powerful in her silence: patience. The system that buried her had taught her how to observe, how to wait, and how to strike only when the timing was perfect. Every time an entitled guest dismissed her or spoke down to her, she smiled, collected the plates, and stored the memory like data, evidence of how easily power blinded people. No one in that restaurant, not even Edward Langford, had the faintest idea who she really was. But under that quiet composure, Ariana was rebuilding, not her old life, but something far stronger. The city that once spat her out had not seen the last of her. She just needed the right opportunity, the right spark to turn everything upside down again. And that spark had just appeared in the form of a billionaire who laughed at her intelligence over dinner. Edward couldn't get her out of his head. No matter how hard he tried, the memory of that calm, confident waitress, Ariana, kept replaying in his mind. The way she had corrected him in front of his own guests. The way her words had sliced through his arrogance like glass. His pride burned hotter than ever. A man like Edward Whitmore wasn't used to being challenged, especially not by someone he considered beneath him. That night, as he sat in his penthouse overlooking the city skyline, he swirled a glass of whiskey and muttered, "Who does she think she is?" By morning, his irritation had turned into obsession. He called his assistant Carter. "Find out everything you can about the waitress from La Mer," Edward ordered coldly. "Name's Ariana. I want her background, work history, everything." Carter hesitated. "Of course, sir." "May I ask why?" Edward's tone sharpened. "Because no ordinary waitress talks like that. I want to know what game she's playing." A few hours later, Carter returned with a file. When Edward opened it, his expression shifted from smugness to disbelief. Ariana wasn't just anyone. She had once been a financial analyst, a rising star at a leading investment firm. 5 years ago, she'd made a bold market prediction that turned out to be dead right. The crash that wiped out millions in assets. She'd been labeled a prodigy, a woman with instincts sharper than any algorithm. Then suddenly she vanished from the corporate world. No scandals, no lawsuits, just silence. Edward stared at her photo, his jaw tightening. Instead of admiration, he felt something else, something that stung. Threat. That evening, he returned to the restaurant. This time, he wasn't there to dine. He wanted answers. Ariana noticed him the moment he walked in. She smiled politely, though her eyes carried a quiet wariness. "Back again. Should I get your usual table?" Edward smirked, leaning on the counter. "No need. I came to ask, what's a financial prodigy doing serving tables?" Her smile didn't fade. "Maybe I just wanted peace," she replied softly. "Money doesn't buy that." "Peace?" he scoffed. "You could be managing millions. Yet here you are, wiping tables." She tilted her head. "And yet you came back. Who's really searching for something?" For the first time, Edward didn't have a clever reply. Her tone wasn't defensive. It was steady, grounded, unshaken. The air between them grew heavy, charged with unspoken challenge. Edward's ego wanted to win, but something deeper, something human, was curious. He straightened his jacket, forcing a grin. "Enjoy your peace while it lasts, Miss Ariana. People like me don't stay curious for long." She met his gaze calmly. "Maybe that's why people like you never find what they're looking for." Edward walked out, but her words followed him like an echo he couldn't silence. For the first time in years, his confidence felt cracked. The game had begun. Edward Whitmore was not a man who liked uncertainty. The mystery around Ariana bothered him more than he wanted to admit. Her confidence, her calm defiance, it all gnawed at his control. He told himself he only wanted the truth, but deep down, it was pride. He could not stand the thought that a waitress might be smarter than him. So behind closed doors, Edward called his legal team. "I want you to dig deeper into Ariana Hale's past," he said, his tone sharp and businesslike. "Find out why she left Whitestone Capital. There must have been a reason, a scandal, a lawsuit, anything." His lawyer, Ms. Turner, frowned slightly. "Sir, that firm's records are sealed. We may need to use less official methods." "Do whatever it takes," Edward snapped. "And make sure she never finds out." Days passed, and Edward pretended to move on. He attended board meetings, smiled for cameras, and gave speeches about integrity in business. But when the lights dimmed, his thoughts went straight back to her. Meanwhile, at La Mer, Ariana began to feel something shift. There were new customers, men who did not seem interested in food. They sat for hours, pretending to check their phones but stealing glances her way. One even followed her to the parking lot, only to drive off when she turned around. Ariana's instincts kicked in. She had been watched before, once by investors who thought she was bluffing, and once by lawyers who wanted to silence her. This felt the same. Instead of fear, she felt focus. Whoever was digging into her past clearly wanted her quiet. That only made her more determined to know why. That night, after her shift, Ariana returned home to her small apartment and powered on her old laptop, the same one she used back in her analyst days. She opened a new document and typed at the top, Langford Enterprises, Financial Review. It was the company Edward controlled, the same empire that owned half the city's skyline. Using public filings, investor reports, and data from financial archives, she began to analyze patterns. The numbers looked clean at first, too clean. But as she went deeper, something strange appeared. Large offshore transfers disguised as consulting fees, investment losses that vanished overnight, and sudden gains that matched known market leaks. Her pulse quickened. Insider trading, shell accounts, classic diversion tactics. It was the same type of fraud she had exposed 5 years ago, the one that got her blacklisted from the financial world. The irony hit her like a punch. The man who mocked her for being a washed-up waitress was profiting from the very crimes she was once accused of exposing. Ariana leaned back in her chair, whispering to herself, "You wanted to know who I am, Mr. Whitmore. You're about to find out." In the days that followed, their encounters grew more charged. Edward would stop by the restaurant under the pretense of business lunches, pretending it was coincidence. But every conversation felt like a duel, words chosen carefully, gazes that lingered too long. "You seem tired," Edward remarked one afternoon as she served his table. "Long nights?" Ariana smiled faintly. "Only when I am doing something worth losing sleep over." He studied her face. "You know, most people would have quit by now." "Most people are not me," she said, meeting his eyes. The silence between them spoke louder than words. There was tension, but also recognition. Each knew the other was hiding something. Each knew the game had changed. That evening, Edward's lawyer returned with a grim update. "We could not find proof of wrongdoing, sir. But we did discover that Ariana's old case. It was sealed under a government protection order." Edward froze. "Protection order? For what reason?" "Whistleblower status," Ms. Turner said carefully. "She was not guilty, Mr. Whitmore. She was protected." The color drained from his face. For the first time, Edward felt the weight of what he had done, and who he was truly up against. That same night, across the city, Ariana printed a stack of documents. Financial statements, offshore records, and coded transfers, all pointing to one name, Edward Whitmore. She placed the papers in a folder and whispered, "You started this, but I will finish it." The balance had shifted. The hunter had become the hunted. The marble floor of Langford Tower gleamed under golden light, reflecting the perfection Edward Whitmore demanded from everything he owned. Tonight's event was his grand showcase, an exclusive investor meeting attended by the city's most powerful names. Cameras lined the back wall, ready to capture his brilliance. Edward adjusted his cufflinks, smiled at the reflection in the glass, and whispered to himself, "Let's show them who runs this city." He took the stage, voice steady, every word rehearsed. "Ladies and gentlemen, Langford Enterprises continues to lead in integrity, innovation, and global expansion." The applause came on cue. Everything seemed flawless, until the door at the back of the room opened. A faint echo of heels against marble drew every head toward the sound. The rhythm was slow, deliberate, like someone who already knew they belonged there. Edward's voice faltered. His jaw tightened, because standing in that doorway, dressed in quiet confidence, was Ariana Hale. A hush swept through the hall. Even the cameras seemed to hesitate. Ariana walked straight down the aisle, her expression calm, her steps steady. In her hand, she carried a plain black folder. "No words, no drama, just purpose." Edward forced a laugh, his tone brittle. "Miss Hale? You seem lost. The staff entrance is downstairs." She stopped at the edge of the long glass table and placed the folder gently before him. "Actually, Mr. Whitmore," she said softly, "I am exactly where I need to be." The tension in the room snapped tight. Ariana opened the folder and spread the documents across the table. Printouts, transfer logs, internal memos, offshore records, all signed with Edward's signature. The investors leaned forward, their eyes scanning the numbers, the dates, the undeniable evidence. One of them whispered, "These are your Cayman accounts." Another frowned. "Is this money laundering?" Ariana did not raise her voice. She did not need to. Every transaction traces back to shell companies created under Langford Holdings, she explained. Funds moved from client accounts to private offshore banks, timed perfectly with inside trades announced weeks later. It is a full cycle of fraud. Edward's face lost its color.
That is ridiculous,
he snapped. You expect anyone to believe a waitress over me? Ariana met his gaze. You are right. They should not believe a waitress. She paused, letting the silence fill the room. But they might believe a former Wall Street analyst who predicted the 2018 crash and testified before the federal board. My name may have been buried, but my record was not. Gasps filled the room. Cameras began clicking. A few journalists who had been invited to cover the event raised their phones, recording everything. Edward tried to regain control, stammering, You stole those files! You broke into— No, she interrupted, calm as ever. I used public disclosures, investor audits, and the digital trail you left when you thought no one would ever check. I did not need to break in, Edward. You left the doors open. The board members exchanged glances. One of them pushed back from the table, muttering, We need legal counsel here. Edward's breathing quickened. This is slander, he shouted, slamming his hand on the table. Do you have any idea who I am? Ariana's eyes did not waver. A man who thought power meant protection. But power without integrity is just noise. The elevator chimed. 2 federal agents stepped out, followed by a pair of NYPD officers. They moved with quiet precision, their badges glinting under the lights. Edward Whitmore? One agent said. You are under arrest for financial fraud, market manipulation, and obstruction of justice. Edward froze, disbelief painted across his face. This is a mistake. I built this city. You cannot just— The agents cut him off, reading his rights as the cameras rolled. The investors stepped back, distancing themselves as security ushered them toward the exits. Ariana stood still, her expression unreadable. Not triumphant, not cruel, and just steady. The truth had done the work for her. As Edward was led away, he looked back at her, the woman he had mocked, underestimated, and tried to destroy. She met his gaze one last time and said quietly, You once asked who I was. Now you know. The room fell silent except for the flash of cameras. The empire he built on arrogance and lies had crumbled, not with a scandalous shout, but with the quiet, unwavering voice of the woman he had tried to silence. Ariana turned toward the exit. As the doors closed behind her, the murmur of stunned whispers filled the hall. Justice had finally spoken, and it sounded a lot like her. By morning, every headline in Manhattan carried the same story. Waitress exposes billionaire fraud. News anchors replayed the footage of Edward Whitmore being led out of his own building in handcuffs, his head bowed, his empire collapsing in real time. The man who once mocked a waitress for speaking was now the face of greed and downfall. Social media erupted with praise for Ariana Hale. At first, she tried to ignore the attention, but messages poured in, from people who remembered her old Wall Street reports, from women who had faced workplace humiliation, from strangers who simply admired her courage. The same networks that had once broadcast her downfall now told her story with awe. Former analyst turned waitress brings billionaire to justice, one channel said. Another headline read, From accused to acclaimed, the woman who fought back with facts. The firm that had once fired her under false accusations issued a public apology. They called it a tragic misunderstanding, but the world knew better. Ariana declined their offer to return. She had closed that chapter forever. With the quiet confidence that had carried her through every storm, Ariana began to build again. Not for approval, not for revenge, but for freedom. She launched a small investment advisory named Hale Capital, a place that valued integrity over image. Her first clients were small business owners and single mothers who had been ignored by traditional firms. She helped them grow what little they had into something lasting. Each success felt different now. Not loud, not flashy, but honest. Months later, one late evening, Ariana stood by her new office window. The city lights shimmered like a million tiny promises below her. The same skyline that once reminded her of betrayal now looked peaceful, alive, and full of second chances. She thought about the night Edward had mocked her, about how one careless sentence had set everything in motion. But there was no bitterness left in her heart, only clarity. In that quiet moment, she realized her victory was not about destroying him. It was about rebuilding herself. A knock on the door broke her thoughts. Her assistant peeked in, smiling softly. "The investors are here for the morning meeting." Ariana turned, smiled back, and said, "Let's get to work." As the door closed, the skyline reflected in the glass behind her, bright, endless, and hers. The woman once dismissed as invisible had become a symbol of truth, resilience, and grace. And somewhere in the city's hum, it felt as if New York itself was whispering her name, not with pity, but with respect. The trial was brief but brutal. Edward Whitmore's empire, once worth billions, unraveled in a matter of weeks. His partners turned against him, investors withdrew, and every secret he had buried surfaced in public records. The same newspapers that once praised his business genius now called him a symbol of greed. His arrogance had written his own downfall. Every lie he told had built the walls of his ruin. From her quiet office uptown, Ariana Hale watched the world move on. She did not celebrate, did not gloat. There was nothing left to prove. Justice had arrived in its own quiet way, not through revenge, but through truth. Sometimes the strongest voice is the one that does not need to shout. Her calm smile reflected in the window as morning light crept over the skyline. The city below was alive again, indifferent, relentless, and full of opportunity. She had survived its cruelty and found peace within it. Somewhere in a courthouse cell, Edward must have thought about that night in the restaurant, the moment he turned his arrogance into a joke. He had mocked a woman he believed was beneath him, and in doing so, had revealed who he truly was. The world has a way of teaching lessons to those who believe they are untouchable. As Ariana looked out at the rising sun, the story had come full circle. He thought she was just another waitress. Turns out she was the lesson he never saw coming.